Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Vital Descent. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarlane, here joined by a returning guest to the show, Joseph Solis-Mullen. How's it going, bud?
It's going good, Patrick. Thank you for having me back on.
Yeah, I was looking at the calendar, and it's been like 10 months since the last time I had you on the first time. And so I just can't believe that much time has passed.
Yeah, it flies. It does. So,
well,
glad to talk to you again.
You've been incredibly busy for, in that period of 10 months. And we were talking about, possibly collaborating on a China book, you, me, and Connor Freeman. But you were actually serious about it. I like to think that I was serious at the time. But so it sounds like you got plans with the Institute at least to publish a book in 23, right? Yeah,
that's right.
And so we had passed like a chapter list around just kind of shooting that. But what was your idea with the book, and what you have an outline of chapters, and what are you hoping to do?
Yeah, well, specifically, we had talked about a book that was like a deep dive into China, sort of a primer for people seeking to understand it. What I did was I took one specific angle, which was what I started writing about initially, and you had me on talking about this, I think you said last year, is the specific narrative, the fake China threat. Things are getting worse by the day, it seems. And as someone who started watching and studying, years ago, just the acceleration in the China threat narrative, it's been intense. It really, I can't think of a modern parallel. Having spoken with my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, about the first Red Scare and sort of the switch that was flipped there to turn, the Soviet Union from an ally to a, deadly enemy. The panic after, quote unquote, the loss of China. I mean, we've really seen, if you remember when Trump came into office and he wanted to, have a trade war with China, the media and the establishment were all aghast that he would say rude things about China or, say that they weren't our friends. And, it's been incredible. It's been absolutely incredible. And of course, you have the Taiwan situation, which, for most of our adult lives has been a virtual non-issue, but which has become a very serious issue. And, I think Joe Biden the other day, did nothing to dispel the concerns that Beijing has, that the United States is, in fact, changing its policy. There are troops. There are U.S. troops on Taiwan now. I was just watching Face the Nation the other day, and there's Bob Gates on there. They asked him point blank, are we going to fight China? He said, well, we can't rule it out. It's like, well, really, we should rule it out, especially over something 80 miles off the coast of China. If China tries to invade the United States, okay, we can definitely fight back on that. But we're really talking about part of China, as you and I have talked about. And you would think that the what's happened in Ukraine would have been sobering to the establishment. It has not been sobering. And in the book, I talk about the dynamics of why that is. And, here you and I are. It's 9:00 my time. We've both worked our vigorous day jobs. And here we are trying to convince people, hey, listen, here's what's going on. Here's why we shouldn't do this. When there are people whose literal job it is to tell people, oh, yeah, we should totally sell all these missiles and fight over Taiwan and stuff. And they're being paid by the literal people who make the weapons. And in any reasonable person who's aware of this, it would just look like the most blatant corruption, a conflict of interest. It's not perceived that way. It's not understood that way. And I have a chapter in the book about that. Like, why does the press churn out so many articles and books that have this one specific way of looking at China? And when you look at who the author is, who paid for them to write the book, 9 times out of 10, they either are coming directly from the Pentagon or from a think tank that takes money from these weapons manufacturers. It's quite incredible.
It makes me think of, I was reading this book about DARPA, I think it was like in November, and one of the times that it really came to prominence was during the war in Vietnam, and I kept thinking about Agent Orange and how would it come about that the military would think, oh, maybe a successful strategy in Vietnam, since we're fighting an insurgency where these people live in the jungle, maybe a good strategy would be to defoliate the entire country. Does that sound like something that someone would organically just think of, like it'd be an actual effective strategy? Like, is there any actual evidence that Agent Orange deprived the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese of anything by defoliating large like segments of the population or of the land area? And it must have been that, oh, all these contractors were thinking of these things and coming forward with it and being like, well, we have all of this chemical compound that we just came up with. And I mean, is there any way that we could come up with the strategy to sell it to the Pentagon? And it just seems to me like they must have had, and I haven't read up on the actual, like the whole story of Agent Orange, but it must have seemed like this company said, oh, well, we have all this industrial byproduct that we don't know what to do with. Why don't we come up with an idea of how to sell it to the Pentagon and offload this waste? You know what I mean? And it just seems like, I don't know that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it was, Conor McGregor was talking with someone about just kind of, and then there was a fellow who was actually in charge of procurement. He was on 60 Minutes talking about how, look, it's not the soldiers say, hey, here's the tactical situation that we're encountering that's impeding us from accomplishing the strategic goals that have been set out. Maybe they say they need something and, 3 years, maybe they ask for some sort of new, reconnaissance equipment, some sort of new radio equipment. 5 years later, they get, 1 million laser pistols.
Right.
It's just not. And it's because we face no serious threats to our national security. Nothing serious. I mean, it's just a cash cow. It's incredible because it's really all just tax dollars. I mean, sure, a company like Boeing makes passenger jets and stuff, but for a company like Raytheon, it's all government money. It's all our money. And then they just take a very small, it's really a pathetic amount, really, when you go and look at the list of what they give to each of these representatives. It's just a few $1,000s. They're just the cheapest whores imaginable. I mean, just for a few $1,000s, they just sell us out with our own money. It's incredible, really. And I think it's really telling, too, that you've gotten so many, actually, Colin Powell's, I think it was his assistant secretary, just gave an interview the other day where he was talking about just how insane it is. And, it's bad when you have all of these people who are from the blob, who are from the establishment, who've lived through it, who've seen it, who are just coming out and saying, what on earth is going on here? Because I think they've finally come around to the fact that, look, these are not the terror wars. These aren't even the Kosovo wars. This is not bombing defenseless people to death all day long and no one can do anything about it. This is provoking potential nuclear escalation over issues that are vital to the national security, strategies and concepts of the Russians and the Chinese. And they say it over and over and over for years and years and years. And I know the title of Scott's book is going to be Provoked. I just thought it was so telling that when the invasion happened, it was expected that you were supposed to say, oh, this horrible, unprovoked invasion. It was a way of controlling the narrative, because while you could certainly I say from the beginning, it was immoral, unjust, libertarian, non-aggression principle. In no world, if you understand the definition of the word provoked, was that unprovoked. It was very much provoked, and probably deliberately so. We may never know during our lifetimes. I don't know. We'll see what happens there. It'd be interesting to know what the internal deliberations are, but it certainly seems, and I know this is not what we're supposed to be talking about, but it does certainly seem like Joe Biden came into office very determined to reinforce the Atlantic community. After, I know Donald Trump was, bullied and conned and, into doing all of these different things. And who knows how much of that was actually his call and how much of it was actually just the Pentagon saying, no, these bomber flights, these are going to happen. This is just how it is. policy, and he had no room to maneuver because he had been, so effectively painted as a Russian spy by the FBI and by the Justice Department. But, Joe Biden certainly came into office saying, nope, we're committed. We're the leaders of the free world. This whole conflict has done horrible things to the European project. It's going to make them much poorer and much more vulnerable and much more dependent on the United States. And so, was that the thinking? Was that the goal? I mean,
well, we're really seeing the same thing play out. I mean, the same Ukraine script play out in the Pacific, and it's so close. It almost seems like deja vu. And I've been talking about with other people, this same script that plays out over and over again, whether, it's Kosovo or Syria or, or Ukraine. It's just the United States gets involved in a civil war and backs one side, splits a country in half, and, interjects in that way. And I mean, you saw it in Korea. It's just so many different places. But even an escalation since we last spoke. I was looking at the date. The last time you and I spoke was July of last year. And since then, Nancy Pelosi has gone to visit. And remind me of the name of the current speaker, Kevin McCarthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he went over just a couple months ago. Well, actually, sorry. Tsai Ing-wen came over here and met with him in the U.S. And it just seems like those two incredibly dramatic escalations, when, Lee Chang-hui in the 90s came over and spoke at Cornell and set off the third Taiwan Strait crisis. But I think the fourth crisis is just a rolling months long kind of thing. So what do you think about that?
I do think it's terribly telling and a gross indictment of a sort of democratic politics, because Kevin McCarthy did what he did essentially just to show that he was as tough as Nancy Pelosi. And Nancy Pelosi did what she did for lobbying purposes. Like that was just a favor to, campaign contributors. Like it's just all that was. She's been a China hawk forever, and you don't need to, look very hard to figure out why when you look at who donates what. It's really completely incredible, especially because, and again, these are things that Congress, separation of powers, they don't care. They don't care. This is about them. It's about what gets them elected, about what gets, their constituents riled up and happy. But, even the Biden administration was not keen on these things. The Pentagon was not keen on these things. They understand that, look, we are trying to contain and box China in, but also not looking to, I don't believe that they are actively trying to provoke a shooting war. I could be wrong, but I mean, it's so hard to guess what's going on in these people's crazy minds.
Yeah, it is.
But I mean, certainly the way they talk is that they're not yet prepared to fight China, that they want to fight China, but they're not quite prepared to fight China yet, is how they talk about it, which is just crazy talk. It's just crazy talk. If you know anything about the geography and the technologies involved, I actually, at the start of the book, The Fake China Threat and the Very Real Danger, that's the title of it, I actually have a map with all the distances scaled, complete with a list of the types of weapons that will be used in this conflict and the range of these weapons, because I want to make clear, to any reader that no U.S. ship would be able to go within 1,000 miles of Taiwan if something like this went down, if a blockade happened. And if the United States government, in like a reverse Cuban Missile Crisis situation, tried to send ships in there, I mean, it would just be it would just be tempting the Chinese to blow it up. And I mean, one of these carriers, I mean, there's no way that they could stop one of these, ship destroying missiles, like these carrier killer missiles. And like, we'd have thousands of dead Americans. And gosh, you shudder to think what will happen if something like that happens. But, the freedom of navigation exercises too are terrible, terrible ideas because, again, even apart from the fact that these are pretty new, they only started insisting on doing these, really during like the Obama years is when they started feeling the need to flex on China because of China's activities in the South China Sea, which, again,
Right.
one of the things that you find Chinese commentators pointing out is like, look, you don't hear about any close calls in the Gulf of Mexico because we ain't there. Which I feel like is a valid point. But the whole idea, and another thing they like to do is conflate, Taiwan with like Japan and South Korea and the Philippines. That like, oh my God, China's about to invade all these places, which, there's no sign at all that that's true. And thankfully, I think most of the cards are weighted in China's favor. When it comes to the Taiwan situation. I also point out in one of my recent articles, because you had said you wanted to talk about those, Taiwanese politics is not unidirectional. Actually, the Democratic Progressive Party got shellacked in elections this past year, in local elections. So we'll be watching to see whether or not they lose the presidency. Because they've been crazy and irresponsible and are provoking bad relations with the mainland when it's, their single biggest trading partner. Obviously, it's a huge security concern because they're the ones who are going to get blown up if this happens. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's important that people understand that this is not the 1950s. The United States will not be able to just calm things down by sailing an aircraft carrier through the Taiwan Strait. This is not even 1996. That whole coast, that whole southern coast is just filled with hypersonic, with just tons of missiles. I mean, just every kind that you can imagine. And I have a detailed list of them at the start of the book, including all their ranges and whatnot. And incredibly, you hear U.S. Defense Department officials talking openly about like, well, we would probably need to strike some of those installations or interrupt their, communications. And it's like, are we seriously talking about hitting mainland China? I mean, what? And then in the omnibus bill, they tried to slip in a change to Taiwan policy where the president would just have pre-authorization to intervene, to just go to war. The Congress just about threw in the towel on it entirely. I mean, of course, they take a back seat, always in the post-World War II period. I mean, we haven't declared war since World War II. I mean, the empire has just been at war the entire time. No need, I guess, to get more declarations of war. We're just at war with the world.
So was the omnibus bill? Are you talking about the 2023 NDAA, or was this something more
No,
recent?
that was the big bill that they just had to pass, the defense bill, and so they tried to slip something in there to change that. I don't remember what the actual rider was, but thankfully it got stripped out. During the committee process, but I thought for sure it was going to go through.
Well, I wanted to make sure, because I think I covered like the Taiwan Policy Act that was put forward by, I think it was Menendez. And then, they had those policies basically eviscerating the one China policy and strategic ambiguity. And then like the most flagrant sections got taken out, but all the funding and stuff stayed in. I think
it did.
Yeah.
They're getting the Israel treatment now.
Yeah, all the the presidential drawdown authority and stuff like that too. Your pieces, because I'm working on a piece right now, and God knows I have to include like the entire background of all the history of everything in all my pieces, which means they only come out once in a blue moon. So I was gonna quickly walk through like our history with Taiwan, going back to like 1895. When China lost Taiwan to Japan, but then go through and just kind of, I guess, like you mentioned Chiang Kai-shek, the Kuomintang and the DPP in these elections, and the crazy aspect that basically now the Kuomintang, which was the separatist group that fled the CCP to Taiwan and took it over, now is in favor of at least being closer to the mainland, which is just an incredible 180.
That is one of the great ironies, isn't it? Actually, while Tsai Ing-wen was in California with Speaker McCarthy, the KMT had a delegation
Right.
in Beijing saying, "Listen, I swear, we really don't want to change the status. Not necessary. We're happy the way things are. We just want things to be cool." And of course, that's not reported because it's not convenient. It's not convenient to pretend that all the Taiwanese aren't just desperate to die with American weapons in their hands. So that all just gets ignored. Which I had written a piece about that as well. Just the way the media cover Taiwan, it's really trying to build this hegemonic thought climate where Taiwan is a U.S. defense commitment. It's the most critical defense commitment because if we don't follow through there, then all of our defense commitments are just null and void. Which, I really wish that were the case. I don't see any reason to have any of these defense commitments. I mean, some of them are there, but it certainly seems like the U.S. is seeking them out. They really pushed hard to get that one with the Philippines, which the Philippines was very lukewarm on anyway, because. Well, and then I don't remember who wrote the article recently, but basically the Biden administration has been really pushing to reopen talks with Beijing. But the reason that they gave was essentially, it's kind of freaking out people in the region. It's
Right.
freaking out allies that were a little too gung ho to kill, and start something with China. So we need to act like we're being responsible and stuff. Kind of forgot that we need to appear, need to take a playbook out of the Roosevelt, out of FDR's book, right? Need to maneuver them into appearing to fire the first shot,
Right.
Yeah. So, which is exactly what's going down here. I swear. I mean, and thankfully, as I was saying earlier, I feel like the stuff about China, and you had me on last year to talk about this. The idea that China is going to take over the world is total nonsense. However, because they have tons of different problems, internal, external, which we've talked about, when it comes to the Taiwan question specifically, all the cards are weighted in Beijing's favor. And unless Taiwan declares independence, the status quo will probably remain, unless the United States gets really provocative. I mean, starts sending. I mean, it's hard to know exactly what the red line is going to be. Because we heard all sorts of things in the run up to this big invasion of Ukraine that, it's calibrated, baby. It's calibrated. It's finally calibrated. I guess we should have asked calibrated to what, but you get kind of a lot of the same talk now, which is don't worry. This is all finally calibrated to make sure that Beijing doesn't invade Taiwan. It's well, they haven't invaded them for 60 years. It seems like things were going just fine. Again, I feel like a lot of it, too, is just they need a reason for being. I mean, they just lost a couple of wars, wasted all this money, all these lives, destroyed America's credibility, or what credibility there was. And, now they need a good war, right? They need a good war now.
It seems like they're trying to kick Vietnam syndrome again, with
right?
With the next Vietnam after the next Vietnam they created. You had mentioned something about that all the cards are weighted in Beijing's favor when it comes to an invasion of Taiwan. And the irony being is that, when you hear about it in the mainstream media, everyone says, China is, they said they would resort to force to reunite the island. When the reality is that they say, we would prefer peaceful means, and that's the preferred way to do it, but we won't rule out a means of force if we're forced to do it. And if we do have to use force, we will try our best to avoid civilian casualties and destroying civilian infrastructure, which on one hand is okay, yeah, right. I'll believe it when I see it. But at the same time, if you turn back the dial in history, and you include this in one of your articles, Sino-Japanese relations are deteriorating, but Western media ignores it, at the Libertarian Institute, May 8th, you had said and made the point that the Kuomintang, when they fled to Taiwan, actually were the ones with the policy of invading the mainland. And so, the irony again is just so bittersweet. It's okay, everything that they accuse the enemy of doing, they're trying to, diffuse everything, like it's like accuse your enemy of what you yourself are doing, basically.
Yes, and I feel like, as you said, there's some hypocrisy there, which essentially, in the 1950s, when that happened, they did, Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang did not want to declare independence. They wanted to go reconquer mainland China. Had they said, you know what, we lost the mainland, we were pretty bad administrators, kind of ruined the country. All right, but we're going to be our own thing here. We want to be independent. Could have been a fait accompli. Could have been. But they didn't give up that policy until the 1990s. And they were actively trying to get the United States to fund it, go along with it, support it until the early 1970s. So you can kind of see how that looks to Beijing, that oh, you made this big deal about how you're the legitimate government of China, how you're going to reinvade. And then, 30 years later, after being belligerent and kind of asshole-ish, you decide, we don't want to play anymore. It's like, well, that's just not how it works sometimes, Like, I'm not one of those people who takes CCP propaganda points, like, at all seriously. Like, you really have to just kind of try and parse those for what they're worth. Like, they say, oh, all Chinese territory that was once that is sacred. It's like Mongolia is sitting there,
Sure, right. Yeah.
But the fact is, Mongolia is not a problem, right? It's not a problem. It's completely economically dependent on China. There's very few people there, and there's no foreign military presence there. And it's right on the border with Russia, and that could open up a can of worms, and their relations are good. So, you know what I mean? So it's not, again, it's like Taiwan is in a strategically valuable location. The United States wants actively to use Taiwan against China, against Beijing. Yeah, I mean, as you said, the third Taiwan Straits crisis, there were 40 years between the second and the third crisis. And it was completely manufactured by the Taiwanese and by the Americans, So again, I mean, Beijing has made zero effort to change the status quo. And all of the subsequent militarization that's occurred that China took on was a result of the third Taiwan Straits crisis, when they were completely humiliated by the United States. And they vowed that we're not going to let that happen again. Like, we thought we had a cool deal. We thought things were one way. Looks like they're not going to be that way. And you know what? In the future, they could alter this deal even further, and we might be in no position to do anything about it. And so they decided to do something about it. And now, if you read someone like Lyle Goldstein from the Naval Institute, he'll tell you it's a slam dunk. If they want it, they'll take it. I mean, that demonstration where they blockaded the island after Pelosi left, like, I mean, that was as easy as me getting up and turning off the light switch here. Like, it could be bad. It could be real bad. And that's why I had predicted, several years ago, that the whole talk about semiconductors, all that stuff, like, the U.S. would just blow that stuff up. And sure enough,
yeah,
we've had multiple people now just in the past couple months say, don't worry about it. We'll just blow that stuff up. It's like, whoa, sovereignty, stuff, life, what, civilian infrastructure, property? Nah, screw that. Those are just talking points, And like I said, the whole idea of the new world order and, the rules of the jungle won't be there anymore. And, we're not going to live like that. The George H.W. Bush spiel, right? That whole thing, that was all destroyed by U.S. actions. Look at everything. Let's say whatever you want about the first Iraq War and all the bad things that came from that. Look, that had UN authorization. That was just different than the stuff that came afterward. The Kosovo War, the Iraq War, that was all just different. I mean, it became very clear that the United States was going to act belligerently and that the rules were only for other people to follow and for the United States to make. So the idea that the rules-based order, it's in danger now. The rules-based order was just a rhetorical device with which to subjugate and beat opponents over the head with. And I think that's why so many in the global South, billions of people, either support Russia out of some sort of, strategic loyalty. They have a strategic relationship with them, or just out of indifference to, obvious Western hypocrisy and just viewing it as, big countries sometimes invade little countries and, they just don't like when other countries do it. The United States, that being, and, it's perfectly, even states like South Africa, who, obviously they're a BRICS member, but they have tilted, toward the United States at various points. Like even their foreign minister says, straight up, it's so weird, it's only bad when other countries do it, didn't say the United States by name. You can't go that far. You really get your hand slapped there, but hinting around it. I didn't want any of it to be this way. It would have been nice. It would have been nice if everyone had just stayed in their boundaries, stayed inside there. I'm not a huge UN fan, but the idea of, constant bickering and arguing at the UN, that's a lot better than what we got instead. It's a lot better. And there's no way back for it. So let's just hope that this transition to a truly multipolar world order is something that we can survive. A lot of it's going to depend on whether or not Washington is willing to cede some amount of prerogative in East Asia. Samuel Huntington, all the way back in like 94, 95, 96, when he wrote Clash of Civilizations, he said, the biggest danger at this point is, I think he used the exact phrase, Western arrogance in the face of, resurgent Chinese assertiveness. And, it is what it is. Like, you can't rule the world. Like, it was a moment. The unipolar moment was a moment, and it's over. And I don't know. Tom Cotton doesn't think we should revisit these security commitments. He thinks we should double down. What do you think, Patrick? Think that's a good idea?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and maybe it'll be more deterrence. If only we had deterred more, maybe then Russia wouldn't be in the Ukraine. I don't know. But I'm just a country lawyer in my basement making podcasts. Welcome to the portion of the show where I tell you how you can help support this content. The best way to do that, guys, is to go to libertyweekly.club. Yes, I haven't changed the URL yet, but this is my membership website that also functions as a newsletter. So if you go to that website, libertyweekly.club, hit the subscribe button in the upper right-hand corner, and you can subscribe for the free newsletter, and I send out a lot of free content. However, there is a section in those free emails that is premium, and that premium section includes early access to my episodes, access to bonus episodes, and preprints of my articles before they're published at the Libertarian Institute or other outlets. So again, go to the website, hit subscribe in the top right-hand corner, and sign up for that email list. You go through the page here and you can see all the content that I've set out in the past. There's a whole bunch of it, guys, and you get access to those previous emails that have gone out as well. Another way to help support me is to go to vitaldescent.com/Stitch Fix and sign up through my link there. You'll get $25 off your first order, and I will also get a $25 credit. Guys, I use this to buy my wardrobe. I'm a father of two. I have my own business. I do this, and I don't have time to go shopping. Can't haul the wife and kids around to have a leisurely shop for myself to pick these clothes. So what Stitch Fix does is that they pick the clothes for you. They send them to you in fixes, and it's really awesome stuff. These are all the pieces that I personally have bought myself. There's a lot of work stuff in there, but there's also casual stuff. I got an awesome plaid shirt that's in there, a flannel, really love that. I got this really cool sweatshirt. I got these awesome boots and a nice windbreaker, really good stuff. So go on over to vitaldescent.com/Stitch Fix. You can also get Vital Descent, really hard not to say Liberty Weekly, Vital Descent merchandise with the cool, awesome new logo from Mises Pieces. You can get all these kinds of things, all this merch. You got coffee cups, pint glasses, sweatshirts, premium t-shirts, premium sweatshirts, all that good stuff there at vitaldescent.com/merch. Also, guys, I started a TikTok channel. And I think that'll be really cool, trying to get more eyeballs on this content and more views. You can see it's already garnering a bunch of views, where I do anti-war cartoon reviews and a lot of cool stuff there. So vitaldescent.com/TikTok is where you can find me. My handle is at @PatMcFarland_, the same as my Twitter handle. Okay, guys, that's about it. Check out those things. Please help support this content. Help me pay my producer and make the show better for you guys. Thanks. So, well, one thing you had mentioned earlier was, it seems, this, and the real subject of my article that I'm working on right now is just, I titled it, "Washington Quietly Dispenses with Strategic Ambiguity." And it was a couple months ago that Avril Haines went in front of, I think it was the House Intelligence Committee, and basically confirmed that the one China, that strategic ambiguity is gone. That she had said, well, you heard the president say 4 times that strategic ambiguity is no more. And right now I'm stuck writing like the entire history of Taiwan, and I haven't gotten more to her statements. But it really just seems like the writing is on the wall. I mean, you got him saying it 4 times, and then all these actions. It's like, my parents growing up, they would always tell me actions speak louder than words. And when we're talking about the hypocrisy of, the US global, rules-based world order, well, what about the joint communiques? Are they just out the window now? And can we unilaterally just ignore that and enact however we want?
From DC's perspective?
Sure.
I mean, I think those were only ever tolerated because they were useful for undermining the Soviets, who were enemy number 1.
That's a fair point.
Now that China is enemy number 1, those are just so many pieces of paper.
Right. Do you know, I mean, do you know what the legal, like in international law, what the legal status of something like a joint communique is? Like, is it binding, and what is the enforceability, and who would enforce it,
Whenever anyone asks me, which you're the lawyer here, so I'm going to say no. Whenever anyone asks me a question about international law, all I can think of is that Teddy Roosevelt quote where he says, "The Monroe Doctrine is not a question of law at all. It is a question of policy."
Sure.
To say that it cannot be a component of international law or the basis of international law is to completely miss the point.
Right.
Like, I mean, I don't think these have no standing. I mean, that's the U.S. government policy, and of course, the United States did recognize Beijing back in 70. Gosh, I don't have the numbers in front of me. 71 or 72, and Beijing got Taipei's seat on the Security Council, and so all that was quite official, and so that's all part of international law. That is the official government of China according to the international community. So that's all true. Yes, Taiwan has no standing there. That's all true. But in terms of the 3 communiques, those are just that was an intergovernmental agreement that was supposed to establish policy, but they were always written in a very opaque, very inexact, abstract way, because Taiwan was just not something that they could move on. And so just out of pure pragmatism, they simply agreed to kick the can down the road. And why the can couldn't keep being kicked down the road, I don't know. As I said, I imagine there was some need to create a new enemy to justify the $1 trillion a year military budget we have now. If we don't have any enemies, what the hell are we got all this stuff for? Because really everything seemed fine. No one was threatening anyone else. I mean, yes, China was becoming more assertive because it has outstanding territorial disputes with states like Vietnam, with states like the Philippines, with Japan, with Korea. I mean, again, these were all things that could have been resolved a long time ago. They weren't. Now we're here. What are we going to do? Fight over Scotia Rock? It's a literal freaking rock. Yeah. I mean, come on. This stuff has nothing to do with American national security. And a part of it too is we need to see some pushback from the citizens, and that's why I'm going to be watching the election next year in Taiwan very closely. Keep a close eye on South Korean politics. Of course, there was a tremendous snub of Nancy Pelosi when she showed up. Just a total blow off move there, which I love that. That's great. We need more of that. We need more strong signals that they do not want to be our new Ukrainians, because they will be. They will be.
It'd be nice to try and find some Taiwanese. Like we had a Taiwanese exchange student. My parents hosted one back when I was an undergrad, but of course I didn't know anything about anything back then. It was 10 years ago. Wasn't into this space at all, but it would have been interesting to talk to her. But I'm sure there's, I've gone back and forth with some people on Twitter about it. But it'd be nice. Maybe I could line up an interview like that or something. But the other people who should be really into this are gamers, because, if chips go out on Taiwan, well then, gaming rigs are going to be like 3 times more expensive. Right. I mean,
well, I guess that's part of the thinking with, this is super cynical, but I did wonder about this when they passed the appropriations to build the chips here. Mm-hmm. Part of me was just thinking, like, is this just so our lives are not like, are they really thinking like, oh man, we really want to, get into it with Beijing over Taiwan, but like Americans are going to go nuts if their iPhones are too expensive, right, or if their games are too expensive. So we got to make sure we have chips here to,
I didn't even think about iPhone chips. Insulation,
yeah. Because the American population, again, I talk about my grandfather a lot, but, he said to me, Joe, that the thing about modern wars is they're just so distant. Like they're not a part of your life at all. When it was World War II, when it was Korea, when it was Vietnam, like you felt it in your community every day. Like people talked about it every day. You knew it was going on. You knew people who were there. You knew people who were dying. When you talk about Korea or World War II, before they were just putting it on the credit card, like you were rationing, you were buying war bonds. Like it was just different. Like now the way everything's set up, just slapping it all on the credit card with a highly, professionalized, technologically dependent force that's very, separate from society. These wars just they and of course they have nothing to do with our security. So it's not like anyone's like really dying to know. That was one of the things that I thought was so telling is when the whole Ukraine thing happened, you had all these people, jumping on the bandwagon, like frankly, who just after talking to them for just a few seconds, it was clear they had absolutely no clue about anything at all. And it was just like, oh man, this is not good. Because when it was Syria, obviously it was like a huge, horrible human catastrophe, but it was like, well, nothing that bad is going to happen to us because these guys are letting, this happen, because really it's on us. It's on us. And I say that a lot. Like we've got to do so. Like we have to stop the empire. Like if we're a democracy at all, which we saw what happens, Donald Trump was illustrative in that way. Certain policies just aren't to be meddled with, I guess. Democracy is not allowed to touch certain things. But I don't know. Certainly the polling data is interesting when you look at young people. They just don't have interest in the military, don't have an interest in, these ideas of like fighting for the free world, like that stuff. I don't know. I guess maybe we should be thankful that they think history started yesterday in some ways. Like they just don't have that messianic impulse, that highly militarist vein. I don't know. We'll see. We have kids, so I don't know. Yeah, we talk about that, but yeah, certainly like my oldest, who's 15, he's just like, oh man, God, I hope we don't get into a war with like Iran or something.
Yeah. I have heard people say, older people be like, what we need is a good war.
Yeah, because bring back the draft.
The account. Yeah. Oh, I don't know if you've heard this before. It's like, well, I think we should have mandatory military service because the military was the best thing that happened to my uncle or whatever. And it's like, there's this movie, Peter Jackson, before he did Lord of the Rings, he came out with this like horrible B zombie movie called Dead Alive, and it took place in New Zealand. And every time I think of that, there's this scene where it's hard to explain, but his there's like this whipped boy who's like a mama's boy, and she gets bit by like a rat at the zoo, and she turns into a zombie. And she has like people over for dinner, and the guy's just the husband of the dinner guest is just ambivalent, and the mother is like rotting next to him, and he pounds the table and he says, "What we need is a good war." And I always just think about that every time. But if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. It's like one of the, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't. It's just too gory. It's like, I can't believe Peter Jackson made this movie. Yeah, but those people exist, man.
They do. Yeah, they very much do. And oh man, it's tough. It's tough dealing with people like that, because they tend to also to be those people who are the ones who are most apt to get riled up about the, quote unquote, loss of our freedoms.
Right.
It's like, don't you understand? War is the health of the state.
Right.
This is just, it's so basic. The cognitive dissonance there, the ability to hold these two entirely contradictory ideas in your head at the same time, doublethink, right? Orwellian. And it comes from just good propaganda. The state is a fabulous propagandist. And it makes sense. I mean, it's all has the semblance of being, quote unquote, free. I think the internet has been wonderfully disruptive to that. But I remember one of the early books that I read that, quote unquote, radicalized me was reading The Manufacture of Consent, and it just kind of understanding how these component parts all fit together, and how, like, it's a quote unquote free press, but like, someone like, Ignatius at the Post, like, if he wants his scoops, he needs to say the things that the Defense Department official tells him to say, or he'll get no scoop. And that's his whole reason for being. That's his paycheck. That's his ticket to being part of the, quote unquote, power elite, which is another great book. The name of the sociologist is escaping me, but that was another good book that, and then Mike Swanson's The War State, and it's wow. These things were they were simple constructions, and they fit together very nicely. And it all just has the perfect outward appearance of respectability and legitimacy, and to even question it, is to be seen as, outside the Overton window, as to be just some kind of crazy guy. It's like, I'm not the one lying to you, trying to get you all killed for money.
Yeah, right.
Like you said,
yeah.
I'm just some, rural guy sitting in his basement chatting with you, like.
Well, I had one last point, because I got to let you go here, Joe. But yeah, it was you mentioned at the beginning all the Red Scare, and you were talking to your grandpa about this and stuff. I live in Wisconsin. My grandpa was a member of the John Birch Society, and he kind of wised up to it in a way at the end, because he wrote an op-ed against Iraq War I that went in the paper, and he said, us conservatives, we won't be fooled again. And I still have the clipping. It's in my copy of Fool's Errand. But all of that seemed like the hijacking of reclaiming the American right, the hijacking of the old conservative anti-war sentiment by the National Review people, and Burnham and stuff like that.
Chambers.
But it really makes me wonder. I mean, we could talk all day about how the progressives now are the war party, and I was just I was flying back because I went out to Philly to see my sister graduate, and I flew back through Newark, and this guy stopped me on my flight back. We were waiting at the gate, and I was wearing my antiwar.com t-shirt, and he stopped me, and he was a really, really wonderful guy, but he was a progressive and he supports Ukraine. So we got to talking about it, and I have no idea how people who, they oppose the war in Vietnam, they oppose the war in Iraq, they oppose the war in Afghanistan, but this is the war. This is the exception to the rule, right? So, well, anyways, Joe, thanks for your time, man. I'd love to have you back. I don't want to wait another year to get my button gear and invite you back on. But you're looking at before the end of the year putting this book out?
Yeah, as soon as possible, because I don't know how long we're gonna have.
Yeah,
and it's a very short book. I wrote it to be, an afternoon read. I mean, I literally wrote this thing to be like just a slim, trim volume that you can blast right through, just to think about the dynamics of what's going on here, who is being paid to say what, why is this even a discussion, what is China actually like, what are its real capabilities, and just to get people thinking about it. Like, I'll take just thinking about it instead of just nodding along to like, well, yeah, China is big and scary and obviously bad,
and there's a lot of
Taiwan
people.
is good.
Yeah,
so we got to think a little more about this, like, or we're all going to die. Like, and that's not hyperbole, right? Like, this is not Afghanistan. This is not Syria. This is not Vietnam. These people can fight back with nuclear weapons.
Right. Yeah. You would think that would be enough. But anyways, well, how can people follow you? You got a website, right? Otherwise, Libertarian Institute and Mises?
Yes, I am at the Institute now. And I'm trying very hard to keep a weekly China piece coming out. I don't think I'll have one this coming week because I actually owe Keith the final edits for the book. And so I really need to work hard over the next week and a half to get that done. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Solis_Mullen. I link all of my stuff there and argue with Hawks. So.
Nice. Yeah, well, we're glad to have you, man, and it's great to catch up with you again. And we'll look forward to next time. And if I don't have you on before the book comes out, I'll definitely have you for the book too.
All right, Patrick. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, we'll do. Thanks, bud.